The afternoon sun pressed down on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, with the kind of dry, unforgiving heat that made the asphalt shimmer in slow waves. A convoy of glossy black sedans tore down the long stretch of road that led toward the high-end auto exposition center, escorted by motorcycles and flanked by camera vans. Tucked between the dark vehicles like a jewel in iron, a midnight blue supercar caught every angle of light and threw it back doubled. The car was the PVX-1 Aurora, a hybrid prototype valued at over $1 million, scheduled to roll onto a stage in less than 55 minutes in front of investors flown in from New York and Dubai. Inside the cabin, Audrey Prescott reviewed her opening remarks one final time on a slim tablet balanced on her knees. She wore a cream bodycon dress with a deep V neckline beneath a pale champagne blazer, and her blonde-brown hair fell long over one shoulder in a precise, expensive wave. At 28 years old, she was the chief executive of Prescott Velocity Motors, and she had inherited that title 2 years earlier when her father passed away. Tonight was supposed to be the night the world stopped calling her the founder's daughter. The supercar shuddered. The shudder was barely perceptible at first, more felt than heard. Then the dashboard flashed red. The cabin lights dimmed for half a second. The hybrid drive cut out. The climate system stalled, and the car rolled to a slow, helpless stop along the shoulder of the highway. The convoy braked in a chaotic ripple. Doors opened. Voices rose. Audrey stepped out into the heat with her tablet still in her hand, and she could feel her heart begin a hard, methodical pounding in her chest. A young technician named Finn Mercer hurried forward with a diagnostic laptop, sweat already beading along his hairline. He plugged a heavy cable into the vehicle's data port, watched lines of red error codes scroll across his screen, and tried to keep his face neutral. Lithium pack lockout. Drivetrain isolation fault ... Thermal protection error ... Module communication breakdown. The codes kept multiplying. Finn looked up and tried to give Audrey a reassuring half-smile, but the smile failed before it formed. A nearby assistant returned to her with the news she did not want to hear. The factory recovery vehicle was at least 80 minutes away. The launch would begin in 55. The math was cruel and immediate. The closest place that could hold the car safely was a small independent garage just down the road, a place none of them had ever heard of, called Whitaker Auto Works. Within minutes, the supercar was being eased onto a flatbed and unloaded onto a slab of cracked concrete in front of a building that looked at first glance as though it had been forgotten by time. The sign was sun-bleached and peeling. The roll-up door bore long scratches along the lower panels. A pair of empty oil drums stood near one wall, and an old pickup truck was parked off to the side under a thin layer of desert dust. The contrast was almost theatrical. The shining hybrid prototype sat in front of the modest workshop like a diamond placed on a dish of clay. Zane Whitaker stepped out from beneath the half-raised door, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He was 29 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair cropped close, a strong jaw, and the kind of quiet, slightly tired eyes that came from years of taking care of someone other than himself. He wore a gray t-shirt with one small smear of grease across the chest, dark work pants, and worn but spotless boots. His daughter Bonnie sat behind the small office counter inside, 7 years old, with light brown hair that fell in loose, soft tangles past her shoulders. She held a worn brown teddy bear in her arms. The bear was named Milo, a gift from her mother before her mother passed away. Audrey took 2 steps into the lot, looked at the ceiling fan turning lazily inside the garage, looked at the homemade wooden tool shelves, looked at the cracked concrete and the dust on the windowsills, and her lips tightened. "You call this a garage," she said. Her voice cut through the heat like cold metal. "It looks more like a place where people abandon broken cars than a place where anyone could touch $1 million supercar." Bonnie ducked her head behind the counter. Her small fingers tightened around Milo until her knuckles turned white. Zane glanced at his daughter for one short, careful second. Then he looked back at Audrey, and his face did not change. He did not raise his voice. He did not flinch. He simply nodded toward the silent supercar. "Do you want me to take a look?" he asked. "Or do you want to wait for the recovery truck?" Audrey looked him up and down. She saw the grease on his shirt, the worn boots, the small daughter peeking from behind the counter. She lifted her chin. "I am not letting a rundown garage put its hands on $1 million car," she said. Zane did not argue. He only watched her. The dashboard inside the supercar blinked red again, almost as if it disagreed with her. He spoke softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. "It is not dead. It is just calling for help in the wrong direction." The clock on the dashboard read 53 minutes to launch. Zane Whitaker had not always lived at the edge of Phoenix. 6 years earlier, he had worked inside one of the cleanest experimental performance hybrid garages in the country, where only the most carefully chosen technicians were trusted to lay hands on prototype electrical systems. He had specialized in low-voltage signal integrity, thermal sensor calibration, safety relay logic, and the strange half-musical art of listening to engines that should not have been making sound. He had been quiet about it, but he had been very good. Then his wife Rachel had gotten sick. The illness had moved faster than any of them had been ready for. Bonnie had only been 3 years old when her mother died. Zane had stood in the hallway of the hospital that night, holding his daughter against his chest, and he had understood very clearly that the choice ahead of him was not really a choice at all. He could keep the high salary and the long travel and the high pressure, and Bonnie would grow up loved by strangers in daycare. Or he could walk away from all of it and raise his daughter himself. He had walked away. He had bought a small failing garage on the edge of Phoenix from an old man who could no longer keep up with the work. He had patched the roof himself. He had repainted the office walls one slow weekend at a time, while Bonnie napped in a folding chair in the corner. He had never had enough money left over to replace the sign or to repair the cracked concrete out front. Every spare dollar went to Bonnie. Inside, however, the shop was a different story. The floor was swept. The tools were arranged by size and function on labeled shelves he had built by hand. He fixed pickup trucks for laborers and sedans for retired teachers, and he had been known to refuse payment entirely from an elderly woman who had brought him her late husband's old car and asked if there was any way at all that he could make it run again. Bonnie grew up at a small painted desk in the corner of the office near the window. She drew pictures of her father at work. She kept Milo on the desk where he could watch over the pencils. When customers asked her why she liked the garage so much, she would always answer with the same words: "Because Daddy is here." Zane had taught her, gently and without ever making it sound like a lecture, that a person's worth was not in the building behind them or the clothes they were wearing. He had told her that some people could have a beautiful house, a beautiful car, beautiful clothes, and still be poor inside if they did not know how to treat people. Bonnie had remembered every word. So when Audrey Prescott called the garage a place where people abandoned broken cars, Bonnie did not understand all of the mechanical terms being thrown around, but she understood the tone. She understood the way the woman's eyes had moved over her father. She understood that something inside her chest hurt very badly, and that she did not know yet whether to cry or to fight. Outside, the heat continued to climb, and Audrey Prescott had bigger problems than she was willing to admit. The phone calls had not stopped since the supercar had died. She stood with her back to the garage door, one hand pressed to her temple, her tablet pressed against her thigh, her assistant Carter Blake hovering at her elbow with another phone already ringing. She listened to her chief of communications. She listened to her head of investor relations. She listened to a board member named George Whitmore, who did not bother to soften his voice. "Audrey," George said, "if that car is not on that stage on time, you are not just losing a launch. You are losing the confidence of the board. You understand what I am saying." She understood. She had understood since the day she had taken her father's chair. The PVX-1 Aurora was not just a car. It was the proof. It was the answer to every whispered comment she had ever pretended not to hear. It was the answer to the cousin who had told her at a holiday dinner that she was very lucky to be the sort of girl people love to photograph. It was the answer to the analyst who had described her last month as presenting beautifully without using the word competent even once. The car had to roll onto that stage on time, and she had to stand in front of it in her cream blazer and tell a hall full of investors what the future of high-performance hybrid mobility looked like. Carter Blake, 35 years old in a gray suit and an immaculate tie, leaned in close and lowered his voice in the way men sometimes lower their voices when they want to sound important. "We should not let a backyard mechanic touch this car," he murmured. "The warranty implications alone could end us." Finn Mercer stood at the open hood with his diagnostic laptop balanced on a portable stand. He had run 3 full scans now. The error codes had not gone away. They had multiplied. He swallowed and turned to Audrey. "Ma'am," he said, "I am not going to lie to you. Without the factory team, we should not be opening this car up. If the high-voltage system is actually locked, we are looking at a tow back to the plant. That is at least a day. Maybe 2. A day." He had said the words "a day." Audrey closed her eyes for 1 full second. A day meant the launch was over. A day meant the board would have everything they needed. A few feet away, Zane Whitaker stood with his hands in the pockets of his work pants, listening. He could hear the relays clicking inside the rear compartment of the supercar, soft little metallic taps, and to him those taps were a language. He could hear the order of them. He could hear the pause between them. The car was not dead. The car was confused. There was a difference, and almost no one in this lot besides him seemed to know that. When Audrey finally lowered her phone, she found him watching her. Her jaw tightened in pure reflex. "What?" she said. "That car is showing you 10 errors at once," he said. When a car shouts 10 things, usually only one of them is actually wrong. The other 9 are scared. Audrey almost laughed. It was a thin, brittle laugh, born of stress more than amusement. But somewhere underneath it, his words made a small, troubling kind of sense. She turned away. She was not ready to admit anything. Not yet. Inside the garage, Bonnie Whitaker had decided that she had been quiet long enough. She slipped out from behind the counter, clutching Milo against her chest, walked carefully across the cracked concrete, and stopped a few feet from the woman in the cream dress. From a small basket on the office shelf, she had taken a cold bottle of water. She held it out with both hands. "You look hot," she said. Audrey blinked down at her. The little girl was small, in pink sneakers, and she was offering her water with the simple, undefended kindness that small children sometimes still had before the world taught them otherwise. "My daddy fixes cars really well," Bonnie said softly. "He just does not have a fancy garage." For a single heartbeat, Audrey did not know what to say. She had been called many things in her career. She had not been spoken to like this in a very long time. Carter Blake, however, decided to be helpful. He looked down at Bonnie with a small, polite, condescending smile. "That is sweet, sweetheart," he said. "But this is $1 million car. Not a toy your daddy can practice on." Something in Bonnie's face went very still. Her small hand tightened around Milo. The bottle of water trembled in her other hand. Audrey heard the comment. She felt it land. She did not stop it. Zane was crossing the lot before anyone realized he had moved. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Carter at all. He knelt down in front of his daughter so that his eyes were level with hers, and he gently straightened the strap of her small backpack. "You do not have to prove anything to me, sweetheart," he said. "I know you believe in me. That is all I need." Bonnie's voice was very small. "But they think you are not good." Zane considered this. He did not lie to her. He did not promise her revenge. He simply smiled. "Just a little. Just enough." Then, in a little while, he said, "They're going to learn something new." He took the bottle of water from her hand, opened it, and pressed it gently into her palm. He told her to go drink it slowly. He stood up. He walked back toward the supercar without ever once looking at Carter Blake. Audrey watched the entire exchange and felt a slow, uncomfortable heat begin to rise behind her ribs that had nothing to do with the desert sun. Finn Mercer made one more attempt with his laptop. He cycled the diagnostic protocols. He tried a soft system reset. He tried a forced communication refresh. The car answered each attempt with the same sequence of red lights and the same dry, hollow click from the start button. Nothing he did made the supercar willing to speak to him. He stepped back at last and looked at Audrey, and his face had finally let go of its professional composure. "I cannot get her to listen," he said. "We need the factory. 24 minutes to launch." It was Zane who finally spoke into the silence. He had been standing near the rear of the supercar with one hand resting lightly on the painted body, his head tilted as though he were listening to a far-off radio station. He turned now and looked directly at Audrey. "That car is not dying," he said. "If the battery were truly dead, the relays would not be cycling like that. If the central module were truly dead, the screen would not be showing the errors in this order. What I am hearing is a false safety lockout. The car thinks it is in danger, and it is wrong." Finn frowned. "How can you tell?" Zane pointed toward the dashboard through the open driver's door. "Because the thermal alarm appeared less than half a second before the drivetrain alarm," he said. "That order matters." The drivetrain did not actually fail. It was disabled because the car suddenly believed something was hot that was not hot. Something is feeding the system a false reading. That is why she keeps clicking. She is not refusing. She is afraid. "If you are wrong," she said. He met her eyes calmly. "If I am wrong, you lose 10 minutes, he answered. "If you keep chasing module replacement, you lose the entire launch." Audrey's pulse pounded behind her temples. Pride pulled her one direction. Math pulled her the other. Math was winning. Finally, she lifted her chin and gave him the smallest nod she had ever given anyone. "You have 10 minutes, she said. "And if you damage anything at all, I'll buy this property and have this garage erased from the map by morning." The threat hit the air like a slap. Bonnie, standing in the office doorway, flinched. The garage was not just a workplace to her. It was her second home. It was where her mother's photograph hung on a small shelf above the calendar. It was where her drawings lived on the office wall. The thought of someone wiping it from the earth turned her stomach in a way she did not have words for. Zane heard the threat. He walked back toward Audrey slowly, and for the first time in the entire afternoon, his voice carried a small, controlled edge. "You can be richer than me," he said quietly. "But do not threaten the place my daughter calls home." The lot went silent. Audrey opened her mouth and then closed it. She did not apologize. She was not ready to. But something had shifted in her chest and she knew it. "Begin," she said. Zane went to work. He did not bring out high-tech equipment. He brought out an older multimeter, a thin inspection light, a mechanical stethoscope, a clean microfiber cloth, a small set of moisture-resistant connector tools, a low-temperature heat source, and a bound notebook full of his own handwriting. Carter Blake watched and made a small sound in his throat that was probably meant to be a laugh but came out closer to a cough. Zane ignored him. He worked through a clear, deliberate sequence. He checked the auxiliary low-voltage system. He listened for the rhythm of the safety relay chain. He read and reread the order of fault codes. He inspected the thermal sensors near the high-voltage pack. He tested the safety contacts at the rear hatch. He examined the small accessory connectors near the cooling channels. Then he stopped, and he asked one simple question. Was this car cleaned this morning with hot pressurized steam, or with high-pressure spray detailing? Carter Blake started to answer too quickly. Audrey held up a hand and turned to her event coordinator on the phone. The answer came back within 20 seconds. Yes. The car had been steam cleaned that morning at the staging facility, with particular attention paid to a small smudge near the rear panel. The detailers had wanted the car flawless under stage lighting. Zane closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them and nodded. So the car did not break on its own, he said. Someone made it too clean in the wrong place. He carefully removed an outer cover near the rear auxiliary bay, taking pictures of every connector before he touched it, placing every screw into a small magnetic tray. Finn Mercer, watching from a few feet away, found himself involuntarily straightening up. The man with the worn shirt was working with the patient, exact rhythm of someone who had been trained on machines worth far more than this one. Beneath the cover, in a small recess near the thermal sensor cluster and the auxiliary safety latch, Zane found what he was looking for. It was almost invisible. A thin, pale film of moisture had settled across one small accessory connector. Hot steam under high pressure had crept past a worn rubber seal and condensed against the fittings inside. The moisture was not enough to short anything. It was enough, however, to make the signal flicker. The car had read the flicker as a sudden temperature anomaly near the battery pack and a possible incomplete latch on the rear compartment. To protect its driver, it had shut everything down. Zane explained it without arrogance, in language a child could follow. "Right now your dashboard is shouting 10 errors at you," he said, "but only one of them is actually telling the truth. That one is lying about all the others. The car is not seriously hurt. It just believes a bad signal." He said it calmly, almost gently. Audrey had nothing to say to that. The phrase landed in her like a small stone dropped into a still well. He did not bypass the safety system. He did not invent a workaround. He dried the connector with a careful low-temperature heat source, cleaned the contacts, sealed the connector with an appropriate moisture barrier so that the car could safely make it through the launch, and reseated everything in exact reverse order. He explained what he was doing each time. He did not mock Carter. He did not glance at Audrey for approval. At last he stood up, wiped his hands, and gestured toward the open driver's door. "She is ready to listen now," he said. "Whether she chooses to start is up to her. 22 minutes to launch." Zane slid into the leather driver's seat. The contrast of his work clothes against the polished interior was nearly cinematic. Audrey stood in the open doorway, her arms folded, her tablet forgotten on the office counter. Bonnie stood near the office door with Milo pressed against her cheek, her eyes huge, her breath held. Zane keyed the auxiliary power. The dashboard came alive. The error codes were still there, glowing red. Carter Blake exhaled a small triumphant sound that he immediately tried to hide. "I told you," he muttered. "There is nothing this man can do." Audrey did not answer. She was watching Zane. Zane spoke quietly. "She is not ready to run yet. She is just willing to listen." He performed a careful resynchronization. He held the auxiliary power steady. He waited the relays out. He cleared the thermal phantom code first. He confirmed the temperature signal was holding within safe range. He reactivated the safety latch logic in the correct sequence. He allowed the hybrid system to perform its self-check. A red light winked out. Then another. Then another. The garage went still in a way that air conditioners and oil drums and even insects seemed to respect. No one moved. Then a single red light returned. Thermal protection unavailable. Audrey's throat tightened. Carter took half a step forward. "Stop," Carter said sharply. "Stop, before you make it worse." Zane did not stop. He listened to the relays one more time. He understood. The system had not yet reaccepted the auxiliary sensor because the start cycle had been interrupted too early. He cut the auxiliary power. He counted, exactly, to 4. He restarted the cycle in a slightly different order. In the office doorway, Bonnie pressed her forehead lightly against Milo's soft head and whispered, "You can do it, Daddy." Zane did not turn around. But the smallest, gentlest smile touched the corner of his mouth. The red light went out. The dashboard cleared completely. For 2 perfect seconds the cabin was silent. Then the high-performance hybrid drive came alive in a low, full controlled growl that filled the entire garage and rolled out across the cracked concrete and into the desert air. The headlights flared on. The system stabilized. The $1 million prototype, silent and dead 20 minutes earlier, breathed. No one in the lot moved for a full breath. Finn Mercer slowly closed his laptop. He did it the way a man closes a book he has been quietly outsmarted by. Carter Blake's face had gone the color of wet paper. Audrey Prescott did not blink. She just stared at the man in the worn gray t-shirt sitting calmly behind the wheel of her future. Zane stepped out of the car. He did not strut. He did not gloat. He crouched down as Bonnie ran across the concrete and threw both arms around his neck, with Milo squashed between them. He held her. He kissed the top of her head. Then he stood up, looked at Audrey, and spoke as if he were giving any other customer normal instructions. "She will run," he said. "But do not push her hard until that connector is replaced with a factory spec part. Tonight she just needs to do her job for 10 minutes on a stage." Audrey opened her mouth, closed it. "How much do I owe you?" she said at last. Zane named a fair, ordinary repair fee. It was not adjusted for the value of the car. It was not adjusted for her panic. It was the price he would have charged anyone, on any normal afternoon, for that amount of careful work. Audrey almost wished he had tried to overcharge her. It would have been easier to deal with. She arrived at the exposition center with 11 minutes to spare. The PVX-1 Aurora rolled onto the stage exactly on cue, the gullwing doors lifted on command, and the spotlights caught the dark blue paint and turned it electric. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. George Whitmore smiled at her now from the front row, as though he had never doubted her for a moment. Carter Blake, recovered from his shock, was already telling reporters in the back of the room that the company's internal technical team had elegantly resolved a small in-transit issue. Audrey heard him. She walked to the microphone, set her notes down, and looked out across the room. She had a choice. She could let the world believe what it wanted to believe. She could let Carter's lie become the press release. She could be photographed beautifully beside the car. She could allow this evening to become the proof her board needed to keep her in her chair. She thought of a little girl with a teddy bear. She set her notes aside. "Before I tell you about the technology behind this car," Audrey said, "I need to tell you about the person who saved it tonight." George Whitmore's smile froze. Carter went pale at the back of the room. The audience went still. She did not look at either of them. She looked instead at the front camera. "This car is not on this stage because I am perfect," she said. "It is on this stage because a single father in a small repair shop on the edge of this city heard something the rest of us missed. And I was wrong this afternoon to judge him by the building behind him." She did not name him. She did not need to. She simply, clearly, in front of the people who paid her salary, told the truth. The room was quiet for a long second. Then someone in the second row began to clap. Then another. The sound spread, slow and uneven and real, through the rest of the hall. Several investors leaned toward one another and began to murmur. It was not the kind of applause Audrey Prescott had been trained to want. It was better. Late that night, after the lights had come down and the questions had ended, Audrey did not return to her penthouse. She turned her own car onto the long, quiet road that led out toward the edge of the city, and she drove herself, alone, back to Whitaker Auto Works. The garage was nearly closed when she arrived. The roll-up door was halfway down. A warm yellow lamp lit the inside. Zane was wiping a wrench clean and setting it back on its hook. Bonnie was asleep in the office chair, Milo tucked beneath her chin, a small cotton blanket pulled up to her shoulders. Audrey stepped quietly under the door. This time she did not see a run-down garage. She saw the swept floor. She saw the tools arranged precisely by size. She saw a child's drawing of a smiling man holding a wrench taped to one wall. She saw a small coat hung carefully near the office door. She saw a child's lunchbox on the corner of a desk. She saw life. Zane noticed her and did not look surprised. "Car acting up again?" he asked. Audrey shook her head. Her voice, when it came, was lower than it had been all day. "This time it is me." She did not approach him first. She walked instead, across the small office floor and lowered herself carefully, so that when Bonnie stirred and opened her sleepy eyes, she was looking into Audrey's face at her own height, not up at her. "I owe you an apology before I owe your father one," Audrey said softly. "I'm sorry that I made you feel like the place where your father works was not something to be proud of. I was wrong. And I'm sorry that I let someone speak to you the way they did this afternoon." Bonnie blinked. She thought about it the way only 7-year-olds think. "Do you still think Daddy's garage is run down?" she asked. Audrey looked around slowly. She let her eyes pass over the swept floor, the labeled shelves, the careful drawings, the sleeping child's blanket, the smell of clean machine oil, and warm light. "I think," she said gently, "that this is the place that saved the most important day of my life." Bonnie considered this very seriously. Then she nodded once, satisfied, and tucked Milo more firmly under her chin. Audrey straightened up and turned to Zane. She did not offer excuses. She did not blame the pressure of the launch. She did not blame Carter. She told him clearly that she had been wrong to insult him. She told him she had been wrong to stand in silence while her assistant insulted his daughter. She told him she had been wrong to threaten the building behind him. Zane listened. When she was done, he did not rush to forgive her. He simply nodded once, slowly. "I am used to people underestimating me," he said. "But she is not the one who should ever have to hear it." Audrey nodded. She had not driven all the way out to the edge of the city only to apologize. She told him that Prescott Velocity Motors wanted to enter into a formal independent maintenance and inspection contract with Whitaker Auto Works for its showcase fleet. She told him she also wanted to retain him personally as an outside technical consultant for difficult hybrid system faults. She made it clear, without him having to ask, that this was not charity. This was a contract built on what she had seen him do that afternoon. Zane took the document she handed him. He did not sign it. He folded it carefully and set it on the corner of his workbench. "I will read it," he said. "But if we work together, the first line of any agreement will be that no one in your company looks down on a working person because they are not wearing a suit." Audrey smiled then. It was not a media smile. It was small and unguarded, and a little uncertain. It was the first time she had smiled like that in 2 years. "That will not be a problem," she said. Bonnie, who had been pretending to be asleep for the last several seconds, sat up suddenly with Milo clutched to her chest. She looked very seriously at Audrey, and then at her father, and then back at Audrey. "Do you know how to fix cars?" she asked. Audrey laughed before she could stop herself. "Not at all," she admitted. Bonnie nodded gravely. "Well," she said, "you can learn from my daddy, but you have to listen to him." Zane's quiet laugh was warm enough to fill the small office. Audrey found herself laughing too, in a way she had not laughed in a long time, and somewhere deep beneath the cream blazer and the practiced posture, she felt a small, surprising piece of herself begin to soften. In the weeks that followed, Whitaker Auto Works changed, but not in the ways one might have expected. The old peeling sign was carefully repainted by hand, but kept. The cracked concrete out front was patched, but not torn out. A new diagnostic station was added in one corner. A better light was installed above Bonnie's desk. A small bookshelf appeared near her chair, filled with picture books about engines and animals and the planets, and at the very top of the shelf, framed, was Bonnie's own crayon drawing of the PVX-1 Aurora. The work changed too. Sports cars came now. Vintage cars came. But Zane still fixed the same old pickup truck for the elderly man down the road, and he still adjusted the brakes on the same retired teacher's sedan once a season for the same modest fee. One afternoon, a wealthy customer in tailored clothes walked through the door, looked around uncertainly, and asked if the place really did service supercars. Before Zane could answer, Bonnie looked up from the small book she was reading at her painted desk, hugged Milo a little closer, and answered for him. "My daddy does not need a fancy garage to do what no one else can do," she said. Audrey, who had stopped by that afternoon under the polite pretext of checking on a fleet vehicle, was leaning quietly against the doorframe with a small bag of cookies for Bonnie hanging from her fingers. She had heard. Zane looked at his daughter, and his eyes went bright in a way that had nothing to do with the desert sun. Bonnie, in the months that followed, would refer to Audrey only in one specific important way. She had decided one evening, after Audrey had brought her a small wooden model car, that the woman in the cream blazer had earned a name. The CEO who knows how to apologize, Bonnie called her. Audrey, when she heard it, was both embarrassed and unspeakably grateful. Zane Whitaker had not become a millionaire. He had not become famous. He had not been carried off into a different life. He had simply been seen, finally, for what he had always been. He had simply been allowed, in front of his daughter, to be respected. And that, in the end, was the only victory he had ever wanted. The lesson of that afternoon, like the best lessons, did not announce itself. It simply settled, the way dust settles on a shelf, in the minds of everyone who had been present. Do not measure a person by the building behind them. Do not measure a person by the sign above their door, the clothes on their shoulders, or the size of their bank account. Some of the finest hands in the world are not standing under bright stage lights. Some of them are quietly working in modest places, raising children, caring for their neighbors, and waiting for the one moment when the world finally has no choice but to look up and see them.